The storm had already swallowed most of Lowe's angels by the time Marilyn left the studio gates that night. Rain pressed against the city like a heavy, suffocating curtain, and the air carried the metallic scent of lightning. Street lamps flickered in long, failing breaths, their halos bending and warping through the sheets of water that drenched the pavement. She pulled her coat tighter, though the cold wasn't what unsettled her. It was the silence between the thunder, the kind of silence that felt wrong, the kind that made the city seem abandoned. Her heels splashed through shallow pools forming at the edge of the road as she hurried toward her car. Wind coiled through the alleyways like something alive. She didn't know why she slowed as she turned onto the service road near the river basin. She could have kept walking, could have ignored the faint tremor in the air, but something in the night tugged at her attention, a feeling more than a sound, like the city holding its breath. Then it came. A thin, distant scream carried by the storm. It didn't sound like anger or shock. It sounded like fear, raw, desperate fear. The sound threaded through the wind, barely audible, almost devoured by thunder, but unmistakably human. She froze, eyes narrowing toward the dark spillway ahead. Massive concrete walls sloped downward into the Lowe's Angels River channel, now a churning black current swelling under the downpour. Beneath the roadway, a storm-drained tunnel yawned like the open mouth of some ancient beast. Water funneled down into it, disappearing into an echoing throat of darkness. The scream came again, faint, distorted by the rush of water, but real. Marilyn's pulse quickened. The studio lights, the makeup, the glamour, they all felt miles away now, irrelevant against the weight of someone suffering in the dark. She stepped toward the spillway, the storm lashing harder against her skin, her hair clinging to her temples in heavy, wet strands. The wind pushed at her back as though urging her forward. At the tunnel's edge, she peered into the blackness. Rainwater poured over the lip, cascading into the deep concrete channel. The tunnel's interior swallowed the storm's fury, turning it into a hollow, endless roar. The darkness was nearly absolute, yet somewhere inside that void, a human voice had cried for help. A faint metallic clang echoed from deep within, followed by a low groan that the thunder nearly erased. She scanned the spillway for signs of anyone else, bystanders, workers, patrol officers, but the storm had cleared the area completely. The world had shrunk to 3 elements: the storm, the tunnel, and whatever waited inside it. She took a breath that tasted like rain and engine oil. Then she climbed down the slippery embankment, her shoes scraping against moss-slick concrete. The water rushed around her ankles, freezing, forceful. Every instinct warned her she was stepping into danger, real danger, the kind not softened by movie sets or safety crews. But she kept going. At the mouth of the tunnel, the rain noise faded just enough for her to hear the deep, steady pulsing of water flowing through the pipes beneath the city. A single flickering maintenance lamp hung from a rusted bracket near the entrance, casting weak yellow light over graffiti-stained walls. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, merging into the darkness ahead. Marilyn stepped inside. The storm's outside world vanished in an instant, replaced by the thick, clinging air of a place meant for utility, not survival. The stench of damp concrete, stagnant water, and rust filled her lungs. The tunnel roof dripped in irregular patterns, each drop echoing like a distant footstep. Her own footsteps sloshed through shallow water as she moved deeper, the thin light behind her shrinking with every step. She paused when the scream came again, louder this time, though broken, as if the person had grown too weak to shout fully. The voice trembled through the long corridor, bouncing off the curved walls until it felt like it surrounded her. She quickened her pace. The maintenance lamp's glow died behind her, leaving only darkness, except for the faintest grey reflection of distant runoff trickling down the center channel. She ran her hand along the cold wall to guide herself. The deeper she went, the louder the drainage system grew. The sound of forced water, metal grates vibrating, unseen machines humming beneath the city's skin. A distant rumble shook dust loose from the ceiling. Ahead, a faint shimmer of light flickered, pale, inconsistent, like a dying flashlight or a broken emergency lamp. Her heartbeat synced with the pulse of the water as she followed the glow. When she rounded the first bend, she stopped. Far down the tunnel, barely visible, was the source of the faint light. A small portable lantern knocked onto its side, flickering as water splashed against it. Next to it, she could see what looked like a boot, not moving, not reacting to the storm or the echoing environment. The rest of the figure was partially submerged, pinned under a collapsed metal grate that must have fallen from the tunnel ceiling. The person was trapped, half in the rising water, half under rusted debris. Marilyn rushed forward, her breath uneven as she closed the distance. The man trapped beneath the grate was conscious, but fadding. His hand twitched weakly toward her, trembling in the cold water. His face was pale and coated in grime. The water level around him surged with every flash flood ripple feeding into the tunnel from above. If the water rose even a few more inches, he would drown where he lay. She dropped to her knees beside him, gripping the edge of the bent metal grate. It was slick with rust, heavy, lodged deep into the concrete frame. She pulled, her fingers slipping. The grate didn't budge. Another rumble shook the tunnel. More water poured in. The man's chest rose and fell with shallow, frantic breaths. She repositioned her feet against the wall and pulled again, harder this time, her muscles burning. The grate groaned but held firm. Her hair dripped over her eyes, stinging them with dirty water. But she didn't blink. She pulled again. This time the metal shifted, just a fraction, but enough to let her know it wasn't impossible. She braced herself for another attempt. That was when she heard it, a sound behind her. Deep in the darkness she'd come from, not a scream, not water, not thunder, a dragging footstep. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the long tunnel like something waking up. Marilyn froze, hands gripping the grate, heart pounding so loudly she felt it in her throat. The man beneath the metal shuddered. The dragging step came again, closer now but still hidden in the shadows behind the curve. She wasn't alone in the tunnel, and whatever was coming was moving toward them. She forced her breath to steady and tightened her grip on the grate. She knew she had only moments to free the man. Moments before the water rose too high or before whatever approached reached them. She pulled again. Harder, the metal screeched, protesting like something alive. Water splashed violently against her legs as she shifted her stance, using every ounce of strength she had. The grate lifted an inch, then two. Enough. She shoved it aside, freeing the man's torso, pulling him toward her. But before she could drag him fully clear, she heard another sound, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. A wet exhale from the darkness behind her. Something was breathing in the tunnel with them, watching, waiting. She gripped the man's arm and pulled him to his feet, her heartbeat thundering louder than the storm itself, and the darkness behind them moved. The darkness behind Marilyn shifted with a weight that did not belong to any echo or trick of the storm. It had rhythm, slow, deliberate, dragging across the tunnel floor in uneven pulses that reverberated through the concrete like the heartbeat of something ancient and unseen. The man she had freed sagged against her, weak and disoriented, his legs barely supporting him. She tightened her hold on him and turned her eyes toward the bend in the tunnel, where the faint drip of water glistened on the curved wall. There was no visible shape, no silhouette, only the oppressive dark swallowing the space where she knew the sound had come from. The dragging grew louder, not fast, not urgent, but steady, as if whatever moved had no reason to rush, as if it already knew there was nowhere for them to go. Marilyn forced herself to breathe. The air in the tunnel was thick, sour with damp metal and rotting runoff. She shifted her weight and tugged the injured man forward, urging him to move despite the pain twisting across his face. He stumbled, nearly falling, but she caught him, bracing both of them against the slick wall. The lantern they had passed flickered in the distance behind them, a weak pulse of dying light that illuminated the water swirling around their ankles. She pulled him toward it, knowing that even a weak glow was better than letting the darkness consume their steps. They managed only a few feet before the noise returned, another dragging step, followed by a low scrape, like claws or metal brushing against cement. Marilyn didn't look back. If she did, she feared she might freeze completely. The man's breath rattled, shallow and frightened, but he clung to her arm with what strength he had left. Together they pushed forward, step by unsteady step, toward the dim lantern light. The tunnel trembled as another rumble of water surged through its distant chambers. A storm-fed wave of runoff groaned somewhere deeper inside the tunnel system, threatening to rise. Marilyn glanced down at the water. It was higher now only by an inch, but the current had grown stronger, swirling around their ankles with a restless pulse. She imagined the water overtaking them, filling the tunnel in a sudden rush. The suffocating blackness, the silence beneath. She pushed the thought aside and focused on the lantern. When they finally reached it, she crouched long enough to snatch it from the ground. The moment she lifted it, the bulb flickered, spitting sparks against the wet floor. She tapped it lightly, and the glow steadied into a shaky amber that pushed the darkness back a few feet. Only a few. She lifted the lantern higher, angling it toward the bend they had come from. The light struck the curve of the tunnel wall. For a second there was nothing. Then the faint outline of something, human-shaped but hunched, appeared at the edge of the light. Marilyn's breath lodged in her throat. The figure froze as the lantern glow brushed it. Its head tilted in an unnatural bird-like motion as though assessing the interference. The lantern flickered and the figure retreated by a single step. Silent, smooth, controlled, not startled, not frightened, just adjusting. Marilyn pressed the lantern to her chest, shielding its glow from sputtering out. She hooked her arm under the injured man. and pushed forward again, guiding him away from the presence behind them. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, its curved walls slick with moss and water, its ceiling dripping in a cold, steady rhythm. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air thickened the deeper they moved. The injured man faltered, his knees buckling. Marilyn caught him, lowering him gently to the side where the wall jutted inward, forming a shallow alcove. He slumped against the concrete, shivering, his skin pale beneath the grime. She knelt beside him, checking the twisted metal gash on his leg where the grate had pinned him. Blood seeped slowly through torn fabric, diluted by the water flowing beneath them. He wouldn't last long without real help. She scanned the tunnel ahead. The passage split into two corridors further down, one sloping toward a lower drainage channel filled with faster water, the other rising slightly toward what might lead back to the surface. A distant hum resonated from the higher path, perhaps from a generator or maintenance unit. A sign of an exit, hope, but the man behind her groaned, weak and frightened. She looked back. The hunched figure stood fully visible now, motionless near the bend, just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. Its posture was wrong, too stiff, too angled, as if its limbs didn't align naturally beneath its soaked clothing. One arm hung longer than it should, fingers nearly brushing the water. Marilyn rose slowly, lifting the lantern toward it. The figure didn't move. The tunnel's hum deepened, vibrating faintly through the soles of her shoes. Her mind raced. She needed to get the man out. Now. The hunched figure's head twitched again, angling to the left in a sharp jolt that sent a chill slicing through her spine. Then it stepped forward, one slow, dragging motion that sent ripples across the water. Marilyn acted before fear could root her in place. She pulled the man to his feet and stumbled toward the higher tunnel, guiding him with her free hand while clutching the lantern in the other. The sloped passage forced them upward, their feet splashing through faster-moving water. Behind them, the dragging footsteps echoed again, growing steadier, louder. She didn't dare look back. The air thinned as they climbed, the hum of unseen machinery growing stronger with each step. A faint draft brushed her face, fresh air from above, faint but real. Hope strengthened her stride. The tunnel narrowed into a long, straight passage too tight for comfort, with pipes lining the left side and rusted grates clinging to the right. The water here was calmer, forming a thin, flowing ribbon along the center. The lantern's light seemed to reach farther, illuminating the path ahead. But in the same moment, the shadows behind them lengthened unnaturally, as though chased by something darker than the absence of light. Marilyn stopped only when the injured man collapsed again, his strength depleted. She lowered him carefully and held the lantern over him, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow, shuddering breaths. She could hear the dragging behind them, closer than before, echoing unevenly, scraping over the curved concrete walls. Something wet dripped steadily in the distance, each drop counting down time they did not have. She turned slowly. The lantern's glow reached just far enough to reveal the bend at the bottom of the sloped passage. Water rippled against the curve. Something moved just beyond the light's reach, slow, patient, unhurried, waiting for the lantern to falter, waiting for Marilyn to make a mistake. The injured man's hand tightened weakly around her wrist, his pulse faint against her skin. Marilyn lifted the lantern higher and took a trembling breath. The exit had to be close. She just had to find it before the darkness behind them finally stepped forward. The lantern shook in Marilyn's hand as she lifted it higher, its faint glow trembling against the dripping concrete. The injured man slumped beside her, breath slowing, each one thinner than the last. The air in the narrow passage grew colder, as though the darkness behind them exhaled its own unnatural chill. Drops of water struck the floor in irregular notes, echoing along the tight corridor like distant, deliberate footsteps. Dragging sound returned, closer than before, louder, the wet scrape of something that had long surrendered the ability to move cleanly. Marilyn tightened her grip on the man's arm and forced him upward again, pulling him step by step. The tunnel ahead sloped toward a faint shimmer of silver light flickering weakly at the far end, a maintenance hatch, an exit, maybe locked, maybe jammed, maybe miles above water level, but still an exit. The dragging behind them picked up pace. Not fast, never fast. Just closer, always closer. Marilyn's breath caught in her chest as she imagined a cold, distorted hand reaching into the lantern glow. She drove the thought away. Her focus snapped to the hatch, a rectangular outline at the tunnel's end, moisture-beaded metal glinting faintly. Rusted, old, but real. She pushed forward. The injured man stumbled with every step, nearly collapsing against the wall. She dragged him upright, ignoring the burning in her arms, the cold water slicing around her legs, the sense of something packing just beyond the fringe of the lantern's light. The closer they came to the hatch, the narrower the passage grew, forcing them sideways between pipes and concrete ribs. The lantern's glow reached only inches ahead, casting warped shadows that contorted around the curving walls. They squeezed through the last pinch section of tunnel, emerging into a small chamber where the drain widened briefly before narrowing again. The maintenance hatch rose above them, bolted into the wall, accessible only by a rusted metal ladder slick with moss. Marilyn set the lantern on a dry patch of concrete and reached for the ladder's bottom rung. Her fingers slipped once, then found purchase. She tested the weight of the injured man against her shoulder. He could barely stand. Climbing would be nearly impossible for him. The dragging sound echoed again, entering the narrow passage they'd just crossed, louder now, booming against the confined walls, flooding the chamber with a sickening awareness that the figure had reached them. Marilyn glanced toward the passage. The lantern's glow didn't reach far enough to reveal the shape, but the sound alone made her pulse spike. The figure stopped at the edge of the chamber, breathing shallow, wet breaths. Marilyn pulled the injured man to the ladder, bracing him against it. His hands trembled as he reached upward, gripping the rung. She pushed from below, hoisting him with every ounce of strength she had. The ladder groaned under their combined weight, rust flacking off in streamers. The man climbed slowly, slipping twice, his feet missing rungs as his consciousness wavered. Marilyn steadied him, guiding his hands to each rung. Their ascent felt impossibly slow. The dragging steps resumed, one then another, entering the chamber. The lantern flickered violently, casting wild shadows across the walls. For an instant, the silhouette appeared at the edge of the light, a bent, elongated form, limbs skewed as though dislocated, its soaking clothing clinging to a frame that moved wrong. Marilyn's throat tightened. She kept pushing the man upward, ignoring the burning in her muscles. The hatch loomed above, still distant but within reach. The man reached the final few rungs, fumbling for the hatch's handle. His hand shook violently as he turned it. The metal resisted, frozen with rust and years of disuse. He pressed harder. The dragging stopped behind Marilyn. Silence filled the chamber, heavy, suffocating, an unnatural pause that made her skin crawl. She didn't want to look. She didn't want confirmation of what stood in the dark inches behind her. The man above her strained again. The hatch handle jerked. The metal groaned, shifting slightly. Air rushed in fresh, cold from the world above. Hope surged through her chest. Then the lantern's flame sputtered and died. Darkness slammed into the chamber like a physical force. Marilyn dragged in a breath that felt too loud in the sudden black. The man above her forced the hatch upward, lifting it with a jagged screech of metal on metal. Pale moonlight poured down through the opening, washing the ladder in a cold blue glow. Marilyn shoved him upward, pushing his legs until he collapsed onto the surface above, rolling into the safety of the open world. She grabbed the ladder, ready to climb, when she felt it, something damp brushing against her coat. Not grabbing, not striking, just touching, testing. She scrambled upward, her boots slipping on the wet rungs. She climbed faster than she ever had in her life, feeling the air shift as the figure below adjusted its stance. A quiet inhalation rose from the dark, as if savoring her fear. She reached the top rung and lunged for the edge of the hatch opening. Her fingers locked onto cold metal. She hoisted herself upward, body trembling, boots scraping desperately against the ladder. The injured man above reached toward her silhouette, offering shaky help. She pulled with everything she had, dragging herself through the narrow opening just as something brushed her heel, cold, wet, and inhumanly steady. She kicked upward, tearing her foot free. Her body slid onto the wet concrete of the street above, chest heaving, lungs burning. The injured man lay beside her, barely conscious but alive. Marilyn pushed the hatch down with a burst of adrenaline. A hand slammed against the metal from below, flat, human-shaped, but wrong in its angle and force. She flinched but shoved harder, forcing the hatch shut until the lock clicked and sealed the darkness beneath it. The storm still raged, but the open night air felt like salvation compared to the suffocating void below. Marilyn crawled back from the hatch, staring at the trembling metal plate as rain hammered against it. No more movement came, no more sounds, just the distant thunder and the man gasping weakly beside her. She dragged him further from the hatch, her arms shaking violently, her breath uneven. The streetlights flickered overhead, blinking in and out with the rhythm of a dying pulse. The storm's ferocity began to fade, leaving only cold wind and relentless rain behind. Marilyn rose unsteadily and scanned the street. A single house light glowed far down the block. A telephone pole tilted nearby, wires sagging but intact. The man needed help immediately. She bent, hoisting his arm over her shoulder, supporting his collapsing weight as she began the long walk down the deserted street. The night felt endless, an ocean of darkness broken only by the occasional flash of lightning revealing glimpses of empty sidewalks, glistening asphalt, and the distant shimmer of the river. She didn't look back at the hatch. She didn't want to, but she felt it in her bones that whatever lurked beneath the city remained there, waiting in the dark tunnels where the world forgot people existed, waiting for the next storm, the next echo, the next lost soul. She tightened her grip around the injured man and kept walking toward the faint glow ahead. Her legs trembled, her clothes soaked through, her heart pounded with the last remnants of terror. But through it all, she moved forward with the quiet, unshakable resolve of someone who refused to let the darkness claim another victim. Dawn was still hours away, but she became her own light in the storm. The man lived because she did not turn back. And behind them, deep beneath the city, something shifted once more in the unseen black, reminded now that even in the darkest depths, someone had dared to enter its domain and escape.